It was the dawn of the 19th century, an age when kings ruled by swords and empires expanded through conquest. But behind the grand battles and royal decrees, a quieter war was being fought, one not with weapons, but with information. And at the heart of that silent war stood one family, the Rothschilds. Born in the ghettos of Frankfurt, Mayor Amschel Rothschild had laid the foundation of a financial dynasty unlike any the world had seen. He trained his 5 sons not merely as bankers, but as messengers of power, each dispatched to a major European capital: London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, and Frankfurt. Their network would become faster than any army, more reliable than any crown courier, and infinitely more profitable than war itself. But destiny's true test came in 1815, at the fields of Waterloo. As Napoleon Bonaparte marched across Europe for one final gamble, every throne and treasury trembled. The outcome of this single battle would decide the fate of nations, currencies, and empires. And in that chaos, one truth became clear. Whoever knew the result first would hold the power to reshape the markets, and by extension, the world. While monarchs waited for their generals' reports, Nathan Mayer Rothschild, stationed in London, relied on something far superior: his family's private intelligence network. Across borders and battlefields, couriers and carrier pigeons raced against time. They weren't carrying orders or maps, but something far more valuable: information. As cannons roared in Belgium, Rothschild's agents stood at the edge of the battlefield, ready to ride at the first sign of victory or defeat. And when the British finally triumphed, one of those couriers galloped toward the English Channel. Crossing rough seas and hostile winds, he carried a simple, coded message, one that would reach Nathan Rothschild a full 24 hours before the British government even knew the war was over. In the London Stock Exchange, uncertainty ruled. Investors feared Napoleon had won, and panic was brewing. But Rothschild, calm, silent, and unreadable, began to sell his holdings. Others saw his move and followed, thinking Britain was doomed. Stocks plummeted. Fortunes evaporated. And when prices reached rock bottom, Rothschild quietly bought them all back. Within hours of the official news arriving, the news of Britain's victory, the markets erupted in euphoria. But by then, Nathan Rothschild had already secured a fortune so vast, it dwarfed entire state treasuries. For the world, Waterloo marked the end of Napoleon. For the Rothschilds, it marked the beginning of an empire, not built with soldiers, but with strategy, secrecy, and speed. Yet behind that brilliant maneuver lay a darker truth. For in mastering the game of information, the Rothschilds had unlocked a weapon more powerful than war itself: control over trust. And as Europe began to rebuild, nations would soon realize that power no longer rested solely with kings or generals. It now belonged to those who controlled the flow of truth. But how did one family turn that single advantage, one telegram, into lasting dominance over European finance? And how did governments, desperate for survival, fall deeper into the Rothschild web of debt and diplomacy? The answer lies in the decades that followed, when money became might, and bankers became the hidden rulers of Europe. The Battle of Waterloo may have ended Napoleon's dream, but it awakened a new power, one that would rule not by flags, but by finance. As smoke cleared from Europe's battlefields, the continent lay shattered, its monarchies weakened, and its treasuries empty. Armies could no longer march without money, and crowns could no longer command without credit. Into this financial chaos stepped the Rothschild family, armed not with swords, but with a network, invisible, precise, and bound by blood. Their courier system, built across 5 major European cities, became the lifeblood of international finance. While diplomats quarreled and generals hesitated, Rothschild couriers carried not rumors, but real intelligence: market prices, political changes, and military updates, faster than any government could dream. And so trust, the foundation of every financial system, shifted quietly from kings to bankers. Nathan Rothschild in London became the cornerstone of this empire. He understood that power no longer came from gold locked in vaults, but from the ability to move it, lend it, and control its flow. Soon, he began funding governments, not as a servant, but as a sovereign in his own right. When Britain needed capital to rebuild after years of war, it was Nathan who stepped in. Through government bonds, he transformed debt into a tool of control. Those who borrowed from him did not just owe money, they owed loyalty. Meanwhile, his brothers in Paris, Vienna, and Naples mirrored the strategy. They financed railways, trade routes, and industrial revolutions. They loaned to kings and republics alike, playing both sides when it suited the family's interest. And because they worked as one, sharing information, coordinating moves, they could predict and manipulate financial tides with near-divine precision. But their success bred suspicion. Whispers spread across Europe of shadowy influence, of secret meetings, of a family whose reach extended from war cabinets to royal courts. To many, the Rothschilds had become more than bankers. They were kingmakers, shaping destinies behind closed doors. And while their public image was one of loyalty to Britain, in truth, they served no flag. Their true allegiance was to the system they had built, a web of credit and obligation that no monarch could escape. By the 1830s, European nations had become financially dependent on Rothschild capital. When revolutions flared, the family supplied funds to whichever side seemed likely to restore order and profit. When peace treaties were signed, it was often Rothschild money that underwrote the rebuilding. In a single generation, 5 brothers had turned a message from Waterloo into a continental monopoly. Through diplomacy wrapped in debt, they had become the silent power behind governments, the unseen architects of Europe's recovery. But every empire, no matter how discreet, eventually draws the attention of rivals. As the family's wealth grew, so did the resentment of those who saw in them not saviors, but puppet masters. And in the shadows of this growing suspicion, new forces began to rise. National banks, secret societies, and political movements determined to reclaim control from the hands of financiers. The Rothschilds had conquered Europe's economy. But as centuries turned, their greatest threat would not come from kings or creditors. It would come from the very system they had created. In the final chapter, we'll uncover how their legacy shaped the birth of modern banking, and how a single telegram from 1815 echoes even in today's global economy. By the mid-19th century, Europe no longer waged wars purely with armies. It fought them through interest rates, loans, and economic leverage. And the Rothschilds, now the undisputed masters of this new battlefield, stood at the center of it all. Their wealth stretched across continents, their agents negotiated treaties, and their letters, coded, confidential, and swift, carried the pulse of empires. Monarchs and ministers alike knew that a nod from Rothschild bankers could stabilize a kingdom, while their refusal could collapse a crown. But the power to sustain nations came with a silent burden, responsibility for outcomes they could not always control. The same financial tools that rebuilt Europe also deepened inequality. As governments borrowed to industrialize, the common people paid the price, through taxes, inflation, and the widening gap between rich and poor. Whispers grew louder, that a single family had too much influence, that they had reduced sovereign nations to clients, and that democracy itself was being shaped by unseen financiers. Myths, rumors, and conspiracy followed, painting the Rothschilds as puppet masters of the modern age. Yet the truth was more complex. The Rothschilds had not created greed. They had merely mastered its mechanics. They understood what governments refused to admit. That money, once centralized, becomes power, and power, once acquired, seeks permanence. But time was changing. The 20th century was dawning, and with it came new systems, state-backed central banks, global trade agreements, and industrial corporations. The Rothschild network, once unrivaled, began to face competition from institutions they had indirectly inspired. The very architecture of international finance, bonds, reserves, global credit, had been shaped by their methods. And now it was growing beyond their control. Wars would again engulf Europe. But this time, they would not be decided by one telegram or one banker's decision. Entire nations had learned to manipulate credit, to fund conflict, to print money from promises. The weapon the Rothschilds had perfected, control through debt, had spread too far to remain in any one family's hands. By the dawn of the modern era, their presence faded quietly from public view. No more bold gambles like Waterloo. No more open rescues of failing empires. They retreated into discreet partnerships, private holdings, and quiet legacies, shaping the world from behind polished doors. And yet their influence remains, not in their name, but in the system they left behind. Every government bond, every international bailout, every interest rate cut, all trace their lineage back to that fateful message from 1815. It began with a single courier, a man racing against time to deliver truth before anyone else. But in that race, humanity discovered something profound. Information is power, and those who control it, even briefly, can change the fate of nations. Today, when markets crash in seconds and fortunes shift with a headline, we are witnessing the legacy of that moment. When a telegram from Waterloo taught the world that wars end, empires fall, but finance remembers. In the end, the Rothschilds didn't just build a banking empire. They built the blueprint for modern global control. Their story is a reminder that history isn't only written by those who win wars. It's also written by those who own the truth.